Welcome to episode 10 of our series, Creationism versus Evolution, Mutation as a Flawed Model. Are there limits to a species? In this episode, we're delving into the observed variations within species in nature, often referred to as varieties or diversity. Among humans, for instance, there's a vast array of differences, all stemming from the genetic pool of the species, which allows for a range of human forms and, indeed, forms within any other species. Mutation alters the genetic pool of a species. However, this change is pinpointed, leading to the argument that it remains within the genetic constraints of the species. Charles Darwin himself cited contemporaries claiming mutation is limited to the species' genetic pool, unable to breach any boundaries, a belief Darwin found unsubstantiated by any source. Despite the lack of DNA knowledge back then, this debate persists. Evolution proponents argue that mutation is not limited, allowing for an accumulation of changes within the genetic constraints, while opponents see the species as a unit with a supreme design, tolerating changes only up to a certain limit. Opponents initially present a theoretical claim: unlimited potential has not been proven. Hence, they argue that it's upon the challengers to prove impossibility, not for them to prove possibility. For generations, zoologists and biologists have tried through increasingly sophisticated methods to induce genetic changes in plant and animal species, including organisms with rapid reproduction rates, equivalent to thousands of generations in standard species. Yet all experiments have shown an upper limit to these changes. Norman Macbeth writes about whether living organisms indeed change unlimitedly, noting species appear stable. Despite extensive efforts over hundreds of years, no one has managed to create a blue rose or a black peony. Similarly, Luther Burbank, one of the most experienced in this field, noted there are limits to potential development, and these limits are law-abiding. Contemporary scholars believe species have limits. W. L. Johansen wrote that the diversity emphasized by Darwin and Wallace cannot, through natural selection, produce variance beyond a certain point, nor explain unlimited diversity among species. One of Darwin's inspirations was the diversity among finches on the Galapagos Islands. However, systematic and comprehensive studies in our time have shown Darwin misinterpreted the facts. He thought there were 14 species of finches, while most can interbreed, indicating they are variations rather than distinct species. Peter and Rosemary Grant, after years observing these finches to find evidence of Darwinian evolution, concluded there has never been evolution leading to new traits there. Field experiments with fruit flies. Observations of Drosophila. Fruit flies for 50 years, equivalent to 25,000 human years, have not witnessed a single mutation that created a new organ or showed progress. An experiment with yeast flies over 20 generations managed to increase their bristle number from 36 to 56, but no further. Upon reaching 56 bristles, the flies became sterile, and their mortality rate significantly increased. Professor Richard Goldschmidt of UCLA, a renowned geneticist, stated, "Even if you could combine 1,000 mutations in one fruit fly, scientifically impossible, it would still be just a fruit fly." Moreover, when mutations occur, nature tends to correct them over generations. Offspring of two specific recessive genes in Drosophila without eyes, when interbred, eventually return to producing normal-eyed flies. Gordon Taylor notes despite 60 years or more of breeding, fruit flies in labs worldwide with a new generation every 10 days, no new species or even a new enzyme has been observed. Attempts to induce mutations in fruit flies through extreme conditions of heat, cold, light, darkness, chemicals and radiation mainly produced harmful mutations. Artificial evolution? Hardly. Only isolated monsters created by genetic researchers could survive outside their breeding containers. In reality, creatures born of mutation tend to be dead, sterile, or revert to their wild predecessors. The Natural History Museum in London dedicates an entire wing to demonstrating the facts of evolution. It's impressive how pink hydrangeas can evolve into blue ones, how a grey moth turns black, and how a wide variety of cichlid fish species evolved in Lake Victoria over thousands of years. However, upon reflection, hydrangeas remain hydrangeas, moths remain moths, and cichlid fish remain cichlid fish. No display convincingly demonstrates a clear-cut case of gradual morphological change in living organisms. Colin Patterson, the senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History in London, states, No one has ever produced a species by mechanisms of natural selection. No one has even come close, and most of the current debate in neo-Darwinism is about this question. Reports on species formation often simplify the complexity involved. Defining what constitutes a species is a challenge, leading to the invention of ad hoc terminologies for reporting on species formation. The most convenient definition ends up being a sort of reproductive isolation between two groups. By this definition, even two dog breeds that look identical, but, due to genetic changes, cannot interbreed or lose sexual attraction might be considered separate species. Examples of new species include an unusual orchid species discovered in 1905 and cases of plant hybridization creating new species, mainly from the early 20th century. However, these new species were merely functions of their parent species, the only novelty being their inability to interbreed, a reproductive split, and it's worth noting that these cases were plants. An attempt to replicate a reproductive split experiment in Drosophila in other labs failed. In summary, the often observed species formation does not involve breaking the upper limit of a species, but rather involves breakdowns in reproductive capabilities, splits rather than improvements. This episode has explored the limits of mutation and species variation, challenging the notion that unlimited evolutionary changes can occur within the genetic constraints of a species. From the stability of species, despite efforts to induce genetic changes, to the reversion to original forms when mutations do occur, the evidence suggests a natural order and boundaries to species evolution. As we continue this series, we'll delve deeper into the complexities of creationism versus evolution, exploring the science, history, and debates that have shaped our understanding of life on Earth.